The media has been talking a lot about unnecessary deaths when it comes to the war in Israel, in Gaza, and there have been many unnecessary deaths. But it's not the Palestinian; it's the many Israelis that have died because of the IDF and the policy of the Israeli government. Today, we're gonna talk about the incident that happened yesterday. Basically, yesterday, actually during the reality show, I have seen some tweets about something happening, something really bad happening in Gaza on the Israeli side, and now we've got some news about it. And I think that this is what happened. Basically, there has been a friendly fire. In the IDF, five soldiers, five paratroopers died. They were killed by, I think, a tank shell or like two tank shells that shot a building, and the idea of soldiers were in that building, and the tank who shot it, they thought it's Hamas or it's the enemy. So it's a very tragic event, and it's sad how many of these have been. And today we're gonna talk about why do these happen and what can be done to prevent it. So before we go further, James, just some opening words.
Tragic is, I guess, a good word to apply, but it's more than just a tragic accident. Let's put it this way. It is the direct result of the way Israel is fighting this war. That these are truly innocent. The Israeli soldiers here, they are truly innocents. One can debate about the Palestinian population. I mean, they elected Hamas. There were civilians, ordinary Palestinians, who, when October 7th happened, broke down the fence and participated in the atrocities. There are Palestinian civilians holding hostages, the Israeli hostages that are still alive, who are still probably being sexually assaulted and tortured for all these last 6 months, and that's the Palestinian population. There is no Palestinian resistance here. The children we talk about as being innocents, we can't take away hundreds of thousands of children from their parents. In the first instance, parents are the ones responsible for the safety of their children. It is the government that is ruling over you that is responsible for your safety against foreign aggression. It is Hamas, the elected rulers of Gaza, who are responsible for all the civilian deaths in Gaza, all of them, as we've said many times on this program. In this case, it's particularly true, as I've said for the last two podcasts here on the Daily Objective. Palestinians want their own civilians dead. They exaggerate the numbers. They lie about the numbers. They use hospitals and schools to shield their leadership and their aggressive weapons. They want their own civilians dead. They are not distinguishing themselves by wearing uniforms so that Israel can distinguish between combatants and non-combatants. So any civilian deaths here, in war in general, let's just take any war in general. Country A versus country B. Country A attacks country B. In country A, there are innocent civilians who are being marshaled to help in the war project, to work in factories, to work in labor camps, to help build roads, to help build planes and munitions. They may be innocent, being forced to work, but they're part of the war machine. They are valid targets. The right of self-defense includes the right to eliminate the capacity for the aggression to occur ever again. And so the responsibility, let me put it properly, the moral responsibility of the government is to protect its own citizens. That requires it to take out the capacity of the aggressive force. That's true of any war. Innocent civilians will be killed. We talk about friendly fire. If it can be avoided, if one death on your soldier's part can be avoided, and it requires that civilians die on the other side, the moral choice for that government is obvious. It is sheer self-sacrifice to allow one of your own soldiers to die so that the civilians on the other side get protected. They are part of the enemy war machine. In this case, unlike, say, Nazi Germany, there is no Palestinian resistance to Hamas. These civilians largely support Hamas and what they're doing. They largely support it. By and large, these are not innocent civilians. What Israel has to have said, as we've said many times, is declare the Palestinian people to be the enemy, just as the German people were the enemy during World War II. A single death from friendly fire that could have been avoided by, say, aerial bombardment by Israel against that same place, even if it meant civilian deaths. Now, Israel is going way above and beyond the call of duty in terms of trying to protect civilian deaths. They are jeopardizing, endangering their own innocent soldiers so that they can protect part of the Hamas war machine, a civilian who is likely to want the death of Israel. And that makes absolutely no sense. Not only can't the Israeli government distinguish, go through, who's innocent and who's not innocent in Gaza, that is all the responsibility of Hamas. That is all the responsibility of the Palestinians. When it comes to innocent children, it is the responsibility of the parents. It is the responsibility of the government. That is Hamas, what they have for a government.
Yeah.
So it's, in my view, utterly immoral for one soldier to die in friendly fire if that could have been avoided by more aggressive action on the part of Israel.
Yeah, and something we have seen, a lot of people, we're going to talk about Finkelstein later, unfortunately. But one thing people like him always bring up is the international law. And the way they use it, it's almost as if international law is just like a wild card. You can use it against Israel for anything they do. Because even when we're going to talk about Finkelstein, I'll just bring up one point. He talks about there is this like a fundamental law of the international law, which is the law of distinction. Basically, you have to distinguish between civilians and militants or combatants. Something he omits is that this responsibility is on both sides. Both sides have to make sure civilians and combatants can be distinguished between themselves. Hamas, and this is something you see, all responsibility is on Israel. Israel has to know who is the combatants. Israel can only kill the combatants. And if there is a civilian in a 1 mile radius of the combatant, you basically cannot engage. You cannot defend yourself. You cannot actually properly wage war. But Hamas is actually not, technically they are not a signatory to any of these international laws. So technically they are not required to follow them. But yeah, something you've also mentioned, the idea that, Israel is doing so much to protect the basically Palestinians instead of the people they actually have to protect. The government has one function and has one responsibility to protect their people, their citizens. Once it once it resigns on that function, what is the purpose of such government? And when you talk about the Second World War, I recommend if there was a one policy Israel could adopt, there is this operation very nicely named called Operation Starvation, which was conducted by the US against Japan. It was during the end of the war when they pretty much bombed every single convoy that moved around the Japanese islands to basically starve the Japanese population. And it turned out that actually led to a much quicker and decisive end of the war. And if it had been done sooner, it would be done sooner. Something we see in Gaza is this almost like unending conflict because of the Israeli incapability to actually wage a war. They capture an area, they move further, but because they give notice to Hamas, they make sure everybody knows what they're doing. They never actually destroy a good size of Hamas, and that's why you see Hamas just moving right back in. So even when it comes to Rafah, more than 500,000 Palestinians were evacuated from Rafah so far. And it is said that all the remaining forces are in Rafah, but how many of these, 500,000 were actually Hamas operatives?
You make a really outstanding point. Because if all these international protocols are to have, first of all, I wouldn't agree with these international rules. They sound immoral on the face of it. They require the death of innocents on the face of it. No, if you're the defender, you do not have any particular responsibility to separate out civilians. Now, obviously, you don't want to do what's unnecessary. You're only doing what's necessary. But the burden is not on the defender to distinguish civilians from combatants. And in any case, to the extent that they do have any such responsibility, you would think that the aggressor would also follow international law, which is not being cited there, that says combatants wear uniforms. The reason why combatants wear uniforms is so that you won't attack our civilians. Hamas has intentionally made it impossible for Israel to distinguish between civilians and combatants. Hamas has made it impossible. Therefore, Hamas wants their own civilians' death. The death of their own civilians is their explicit policy. And all of these people complaining about unnecessary deaths by Israel, they are pro-Hamas. They are following the Hamas line. They're demanding that Israel, look, if one government tried to engage in police type activity, if Israel, for example, over the last 18 years, Hamas has controlled the Gaza Strip. Israel has not had any governmental control over Gaza. Could Israel have gone in and engaged in police operations to separate out terrorists? No, they could not. Could they go in and separate parents from children, pro-terrorism parents from their children so that they don't get educated into wanting to die in order to kill Jews? No, these kids are being propagandized. Their minds are being warped. There's nothing Israel can do directly about the education of the children in Gaza. There's nothing Israel can do to separate out terrorists. And in fact, Hamas has done everything they can to make that impossible. In fact, they've gone so far as to put military and leadership installations under hospitals and schools. Their whole thing is based on our flawed morality. Our morality that says we can't kill so-called innocent civilians if they're in the aggressive nation. Well, that is exactly wrong. You can morally do whatever it takes to stop the aggression from happening. And all those who advocate something else want perpetual, continuous war. They don't want Hamas taken out. Look how long it's taken. Months. This war, as we've said, should have been wrapped up back in October. If you care about if there are innocent Palestinian civilians, those Palestinian children, for example, in Gaza, to the extent you want to protect them, you want this war ended quickly, efficiently, and decisively, even if that means a bunch of civilian deaths. Civilians that Israel has no control over. Hamas has control over. Those civilian babies that Hamas is putting up in front of them as a human shield. Literally putting up a baby in front of them as a human shield after they attack your civilians. A surprise attack filled with atrocities, mutilation, rape, burning people to death, watching your mother get tortured and raped, watching the mother watching her children getting tortured and raped. That's what we're talking about. These people are filled with a racist hatred toward Israel, the people themselves. And until and unless that condition changes, there's no hope for a long-term solution. And that requires overwhelming, decisive action on the part of Israel. That is to say, one in which many, many Palestinian civilians must die. Now, I don't like saying that, but it's Hamas that is necessitated, required, demanded that reasonable self-defense mean the death of civilians. If they want it over, they can surrender tomorrow and release the hostages.
Yeah, and when we talk about the unnecessary deaths, there's also, and I don't know what to exactly call it, but so basically and I'm not sure if I mentioned it so far, but so far in Gaza, as far as I understand, 278 soldiers died, although I'm not sure if this number was before this or after this incident. But out of these 50, which makes it about, I don't know, 20%, were killed by friendly fire. And it is because of, Israeli refusal to actually, bomb the hell out of these people first before they actually go in and before they actually try to do anything.
There have been
Something,
hundreds killed and hundreds more severely, gravely, lifetime wounded. And we didn't get the percentage on that, though, as well. But the significant percentage of the gravely wounded among the Israeli soldiers, we have hundreds of those as well, are victims of friendly fire. During the Korean War, I know this was 75 years ago now, or about 70 or so years ago now. My uncle was in the United States Marines, and he fought in the in Korea during the Korean War to protect South Korea. And he himself was shot by friendly fire and nearly died. His sergeant ran out into the fire zone, put his fist into my uncle's chest to stop the bleeding, and bravely carried him back and saved his life. And he was highly decorated for saving my uncle's life. But for the rest of my uncle's life, he was very, very badly disabled because of this injury that he got in Korea from friendly fire. But his entire life, he did not blame the United States government. He didn't blame the soldier who was responsible for the bullet that entered his chest either. He blamed the communists properly. Now, in that case, I'm not sure, we say could America have been more decisive, aggressive in their actions to protect American soldiers more? I'm not sure. I wouldn't make that evaluation. In this case, in Israel's case, I can make that evaluation. Israel is so overwhelmingly more powerful than Hamas that they could have wiped out Hamas. Yes, it would have meant thousands of civilian casualties. I don't believe any of the Hamas numbers. We've done that earlier this week as well. Do check out the Daily Objective from I believe it was yesterday, about the civilian death revision numbers. They've been lying about it, but there would actually have been thousands of civilians who died had they done this properly. And Israel cannot have a micron of guilt about that. Hamas is necessitating this. And if it saves a single soldier's life, you take it out on their population so that they feel it and they bring a halt to the war. That's the only way to approach this. Otherwise, you're just inviting endless October 7th, more and more October 7th. For the Israeli government to responsibly protect its own people, it must kill innocent civilians, and I'm going to include children here because they are, I guess, the innocent group here. This group of children who are being brainwashed to be more perpetrators of October 7th in a culture that hates Israel, no, and a civilian population that largely supports Hamas, okay, they have to be killed. I'm sorry, Hamas wants it. Hamas necessitates it. Hamas uses them as shields. Hamas won't distinguish their combatants. No. Under those circumstances, there is no excuse for one Israeli soldier to die if Israel can do this from the air. As I say, on October 10th, I don't know why Gaza City wasn't rubble. I don't know why Israel, it warns people to get out of buildings. They'll make phone calls, send text messages, drop flyers so that the Palestinian civilians get out of these buildings. And of course, a bunch of terrorists go with them. But the culture at large hates Israel. Most of the people in Gaza want Israel destroyed, and they are valid targets. You just state that outright. They're valid targets, and the responsibility is all that of Hamas.
Well, when it comes to these buildings, usually the Hamas militants get out and the civilians are forced to stay or willingly stay to serve the propaganda machine. Something I should mention about North Korea, or Korea just in general, there was a certain general recommending nuclear bombing Northern Korea, meaning the border with China. So maybe that could have been done.
General MacArthur ran into problems with the president of the United States. The general in charge of that war ran into problems with the president of the United States, Harry Truman at the time, and He actually got fired by the president, and there was a great deal of controversy because of that. He did advocate a much more aggressive approach to the communists in East Asia than Truman was willing to engage in. And perhaps that could have reduced the need for even doing the Korean War as we did, and might have saved my uncle, indeed. But, in that case, it's a closer call, at least, than it is in this case. In this case, there's no question it's the way the Israeli government has been operating this war that killed these IDF soldiers, 22-year-old soldiers, 21-year-old soldiers, a captain and 4 sergeants, as I understand it, all around the age of 21 or 22, were killed unnecessarily, by friendly fire. And I do not blame the Israeli soldiers who did the firing. I blame the Israeli government. They're the ones who killed these IDF soldiers, needlessly killed their own people, in my view, because of the tactics they're taking against Hamas. The internationally appeasing, morally corrupt standard that they're using. No, it is not Israel's responsibility to protect the civilians of Gaza. That was Hamas's responsibility. The responsibility to protect the people of Gaza is Hamas's. They are overtly demanding that their own people get killed and making it impossible to do otherwise.
Yeah, something to remember. So, as far as I understand, the probe and the full report is not out, but it seems like the tank, the I don't know what to call them, but like the tanks and the part of that group met with the paratroopers before, so they were supposed to know that they are there. So maybe there was some sort of lack of communication, some sort of lack of intelligence. But whatever it is, even if it ends up being a certain amount of soldiers' fault, the whole fact that these soldiers have to be in such a positions is on the IDF and on the Israeli government, who are not conducting this war.
A firefight is a high-stress situation. A firefight is a high-stress situation. Mistakes, innocent mistakes will be made. If they say to you, if your people say we've cleared the building and you still see people in that building and there's been some kind of miscommunication and you fire at that building and it turns out that there were civilians in that building, even IDF soldiers in that building, oof. That is the fault of the whole approach to this war. I will not. There might be individual responsibility. I can't know, and no doubt Israel, being a civilized nation, will do a full investigation on this. Something you couldn't expect from Hamas or the Palestinian Authority. But there may have been some negligence on the ground. But some negligence on the ground during a firefight is one thing. The whole strategic approach of the Israeli government in allowing their soldiers to die rather than Palestinian civilians is corrupt, is morally corrupt. It's a morally corrupt approach for any government to put its soldiers' lives below the attacking nation's civilians. Full stop. Full stop. They started the war. And in this case, as I say, it is particularly egregious. They don't wear uniforms. They put stuff in hospitals and schools. They are demanding, they are necessitating the death of their own civilians. Holding back is exactly what they expect. Holding back is exactly what they want. Playing into that is precisely Hamas's strategy for survival. Hamas must be utterly destroyed. Otherwise, we will get October 7th after October 7th, just as they promised.
And something I would have I even mentioned this? There's one point I wanted to make. The soldiers dying on the IDF side is very sad when it happens. It's tragic, and it is the fault. I mean, ultimately, it's the fault of Hamas, the actual party that has attacked Israel. But Israel has a responsibility to protect their own citizens, their own soldiers, and when it refuses to actually wage a war fully, it doesn't do it fully. And another thing to mention is there is still at the highest point, there's 500,000 of Israeli citizens were displaced, and it currently is still more than 60,000 Israeli civilians are displaced either from the evacuation zones in Gaza or in the north
The thing we're
at the
never
Lebanon
told,
border.
yeah, we're always told about the Palestinians in Gaza, most of whom are racists who want the destruction of Israel, being displaced and moved about. And they're moved about, frankly, because Israel wants to avoid killing these civilians. So all the complaint is about how they're displaced. No one focuses on the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands at certain times of Israelis who are constantly being displaced. Who are being displaced? No, it's all one side. It's all Israel has to, everything is Israel's fault. Of course, that's a basic anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, approach, if you really believe that. No, morality does not require you to sacrifice. Morality does not require you to die. And any kind of morality that says any death at all, even in self-defense, is intrinsically evil, is itself intrinsically evil. It sanctions, promotes, encourages, allows the continuation of evil.
And with that, thank you everyone for stopping by. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes with the reality show where we'll discuss the greatest Hamas supporter, Norman Finkelstein. There's been a recent interview with him and Yishai Fleischer on Piers Morgan. So we're going to be discussing that. We're going to be, I think, mainly commenting on Norman Finkelstein. So link for that is in the chat. Thank you, James. Thank you, James, for joining me today. And we'll also be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective and also the reality show, which will have a special guest, and it's Ben Bayer from the Ayn Rand Institute. So that one is already up, so make sure to go give it a like and make sure you don't forget about it. So again, thank you, James. Thank you, everyone, and bye-bye.